All right, kinesiology, 230, chapter 15, presentation number 5, talking training load, resistance, and repetitions. Going to go on and move on to the next slide. There we go. All right, so with this, we've gone through this list. We're making our way down. We already hit exercise selection and order. Now we're in training load. This is on page 404. This whole presentation is going to be on resistance and repetitions. So it's going to be 11 slides of that content. So here we go. Excuse me. When you determine your training load, you talk about having a percentage of a one rep max, and it's not just randomly going in on to grab a dumbbell and grab weights. You talk about different ways to actually classify what it is you're doing. So it can be a percentage of a one rep max. It can be a repetition maximum. It can be based off of RPE, relative perceived exertion, just how hard it was to push that weight. And then repetitions and reserve is another strategy as well. So these three things that we'll go over, influencing factors, determining training load, and guidelines for assigning loads, will be focused on with this little subcategory right down here. So training load is the amount of weight to be used. It's the resistance that's offered, whether it's a machine, a kettlebell, a ball, dumbbells, or a bar. And the volume is the number of repetitions that will be completed within a set. And then total volume is the number of repetitions that are completed for an entire exercise. So if you do one set of 10, if you do one set and you do 10 repetitions, that's 10 reps. That'd be volume for one set. If you do 3 sets of 10, that'd be 30 reps. So total volume load is the total amount of weight that's moved over a workout for an exercise. And total volume load is a mathematical combination of how many reps you moved a particular weight. So if we know that we're doing 140 pounds and we do 140 pounds for 10 repetitions and we do 3 sets of 10, well, we have our total volume, that's 30 reps. Our total volume load will be 30 repetitions times 140 pounds. That's our weight up here. That's 4,200 pounds of weight moved. Now, you got to vary these. You have to vary your rep and set combinations. You have to vary your loading parameters, and that will then flow through and affect your total volume load parameters as well. So if we look at this and we kind of take it out a step further, when a client begins working out, they're going to experience gains in strength. That's just an inherent byproduct of what we're doing. You just can't help it. And you should urge your clients to get stronger because it's a benefit no matter how you slice it. I've had some clients who are so wigged out about getting stronger, and it's not a detriment. It's always a benefit. But the strength gains in the early stages of a workout program are more attributed to the greater effectiveness or better coordinated firing of the central nervous system to recruit the right muscle fibers as opposed to packing on tons of muscle on the front end. If we look at different rep schemes and how this plays out, you can incrementally increase the total volume load for somebody, and it doesn't take much to really have a big influence. So if we look at the same exercise, chest press, chest press, chest press, we do 3 sets of 10 versus 3 sets of 10, and they do 100 pounds. That's 3,000 pounds moved, right? 30 repetitions times 100, 3,000. If they do it with 105 pounds, you sneak a little half pound or half plate on there at 5 pounds. Well, they've just moved 3,150 pounds. You can mathematically show them that they got stronger. They're doing more work. Additionally, if we do 3 sets of 12 instead of 3 sets of 10, well, that ends up being 36 repetitions over the course of the workout at 100 pounds apiece. They've done 3,600 pounds. So there's 2 ways that you can mathematically show them that they're getting stronger. And you want your clients to get stronger, and it's a very easy way to show them, hey, last time we did 100 pounds for 10 reps, and today you did 3 sets of 12, and you did it quite easily. We got to go up from here. No matter how you look at it, though, the total volume load has increased for both of them. And you can make your arguments on which one's better. If for TVL is higher, it's 3,600 versus 3,150. You can make your arguments. I get it. For the context of this class, we're not going to get into that, but just realize you have 2 mechanisms to show your clients. It's either they move more weight or they move the same weight more times. Really simple way to show it mathematically. No, when you look at training load, it's provided through programming that calculates workouts off of 1 rep max. And when people start working out, they really don't know what their 1 rep max is, nor do you. and you're kind of trying to like poke at the ceiling to figure out just how heavy you can take them. And let's face it, when you look at a person, their theoretical max, right? You have this God-given body that your parents gave you that can push a certain amount of weight in squats, that can push a certain amount of weight in bench press, you can power clean a certain amount of weight, you can box jump a certain height. But there's a theoretical limit to that based upon you and how you're made, how your levers are, how the muscles are attached, everything that we've talked about in the previous portions of the class. So when we look at loading and repetition, the very first part of this, you have to understand that there's a theoretical absolute max that we all have. Pick your exercise. It doesn't matter what it is. You can only get so strong. And I'm sure there's some platehead out there who's going to be like, the heck with that, I can get stronger. But I'm telling you, there's a genetic predisposition for all of us to pick an exercise, and we have a limit. Our goal, especially if we're working with athletes, is to try to get as close as possible to that limit. But early on in an exercise program, the training max, or many times it's called a floating max because it kind of floats from day to day on one particular exercise in the early stages, is pretty far away. I mean, you're doing 3 sets of 10 at maybe 20 pounds, and the person's going to get a training response. They're huffing and puffing, they're really getting tired, and they're sore the next day, but really is 20 pounds all that they can push. It's actually, there's a huge gap there, and they have a lot of potential to be able to make rather large gains early on in the front part of a program. As we get into multiple years and further out in a program, you get to hear. And a good example are like people who train for the Olympics. They work unbelievably hard over the course of multiple years, quadrennial programming from one Olympic competition to the next Olympic competition, to have on order of 1% increase, perhaps. So realize that your greatest opportunity is with your general population when you work with them, because they don't really work out too much. They've not really cultivated what their strength, and what you're doing is taking them along this path to get them closer and closer to their theoretical absolute max. And I urge you to view this in terms of bicep curls, squats, push-ups, box jumps, running, jumping rope, whatever it may be. There's a theoretical absolute max to all the different activities that we do in the gym. And when a person who comes in who's very deconditioned, they've never worked out before, there is a sizable amount of opportunity to work with that person. And then when you get into something like this, where there's a smaller and tighter gap, you have to be very astute in terms of your program design to be able to tease out that 1% gain over the course of a year. It won't be a 1% gain here. There's too much opportunity. You're going to have multifactorial gains, no doubt about it. So the point I'm trying to make is, when you look at this, we can change the loading and repetition schemes to be able to push an increase in the work completed to get a person along this line, this training floating max, during our workouts. So when you're looking at this, when you're trying to determine how much weight to do, the first thing is, can the client even do the exercise? Have you prepared them to be able to do a squat or a push press or a bench press? Can they handle the desired loading? It's silly to have Ida, who's 80 years old, who just finished playing bridge, come in and you're going to ask her to bench 315. That's nonsensical, unless Ida's an accomplished power lifter at 80 years old. So, they offer 3 methods for assigning training load: repetition maximum testing, repetitions in reserve, and rating of perceived exertion. So what you have to do is, when you first work with people, is assess the movement pattern and do so under low load to determine if the person is competent to be able to do the movement that you're asking. From there, you're trying to continually refine and teach technique. It could be Kaizen 6, it could be Six Sigma Black Belt, whatever refinement mindset you want to use. But the goal is to continually refine the movement pattern to make them more efficient, and then add load after they've had increased mastery. So you want to have some sense of accomplishment in terms of increasing their efficacy and ability to move correctly, and then you can add load, because load will actually take away from their efficacy and movement patterns. It's just a natural product. They'll find compensation patterns as a result of load. And there's a trade-off in there where you have to get that just right, that Goldilocks of having just enough load to get the response that you want, to not blow their technique out of the water. Okay, so understand that muscle, bone, and connective tissue gain strength by placing load in the system. We've already talked about that several times. And, that load in the system causes those to get stronger at inherently different rates. Let me get myself out of the way here. When you look at percentage of a 1 rep max relationship, the 1 RM is the max amount of weight that can be moved for 1 repetition, 1 rep max. There's 10 rep max, 8 rep max, but this is a 1 rep max. And it is a case where when you look at these two, percentage of 1 rep max relationship, the 1 RM versus the repetition maximum, this becomes a conversation of failure is achieved at 8 reps or it's achieved at 5 reps, whatever that may be. They can't push another repetition out. And we can mathematically calculate out what their max is based off of their accomplished reps within a particular set. It's mathematical. We can show that pretty easily, and we'll talk more about that. So when you look at repetition maximum target zone, you're trying to target within a particular range. Okay, today we're going to do somewhere between 8 to 10 reps. Today we're going to do between 6 and 8 reps, whatever that range may be. But I will say this, when you look at what the book provides and what you'll be asked later on, they make it a point that the heaviest load for assistance exercises should be approximately 8 RM. Meaning, if you're going to go into the gym, you're going to do a bicep curl, you should only do 8 RM, nothing heavier than that. So you wouldn't do heavy sets of 4. You're not going to do heavy sets of 6. You're not going to do anything lower than 8 reps for like an assistance exercise. I would urge you to remember this for later, but I will tell you as somebody who works out, and I've been in gyms my entire life, sometimes you like banging and hanging and throwing some heavy weights on when you do single joint exercises just to elicit a training response, and you might go down to sets of 4 or 2 on tricep push down or bicep curl, just because that's what we do in the gym. All right. And when we look at these RPE examples over here, this is an Omni scale over here. And they talk about easy on one end, extremely hard on the other end. And it's an RPE in terms of a scale of 1 to 10. And you're trying to find a way to quantify what work is. And this is very difficult when you start talking about workouts per se. But each increment on here it is a 10% increase. So 0 to 1 is a 10% increase. 1 to 2 will be 20 to 30 to 40 to 50. So it's 10% greater for each one. Just remember that. And then you look at this side by side with an RPE, you can see like 10 is the maximal effort. You have no repetitions in reserve. You do perhaps a set of 8, and you'd have 2 repetitions remaining in the model of having repetitions in reserve. And you'd have a conversation of, okay, when you do programming, do you want to have 2 reps in reserve? Now, I can tell you that the concept of non-failure training has its place, and I've used it effectively in other areas. So like in Olympic weightlifting or in a download. So traditionally, these would be the rep ranges, real loose, 65 to 70, all the way down to 95 to 100 for 1 rep. But if you're in a download week and you throw somebody into a rep scheme of 2 repetitions at 80%, that is actually, especially if you've been training them down in this range of 4s, 3s, 2s, and 1s, 80% at 2 is actually going to be quite easy for them. Meaning, you could put a weight on a bar and they can bench press it, and you ask them to do it only 2 times, but they could probably do it 4 times. Perhaps, maybe, they can get another 2 reps out of that set. So they have 2 repetitions in reserve. It has its place, especially in a download week. Now, if you're talking about Olympic downloads or variations, you probably wouldn't even do sets of 10 or 8, even Olympic version exercises. You'd be more 6s all the way down to 1s. And when you get into this and you start teaching Olympic movement patterns and you're working on having proper movement patterns in the Olympic complex, you might use lighter loads that are 10% lighter than what you normally would use for Olympic weightlifting, just to be able to teach technique and have a central nervous system fire and be able to teach on the neural side, load the myo side a little bit, but not blow the person completely out of the water. So it has its place when we talk rep and reserve, and it's something you can use in your own training. But just realize when we talk reps and reserve, when you're asked to do 2 repetitions and you're able to do 3 more, that tells you that the rep and reserve tells you that you have 3 extra reps that you could have done, and then you can calculate out what your max is based upon that. Or you're using it as a download and that's deliberate. All right, guys, signing off.